Welcome to another episode of the Chronicles of Mr. and Mr. Pierre. And I'm so glad to be joined by Mrs. Garcia. Ms. Garcia, thank you for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Same. I'm really excited to have this conversation because, as we were saying right before we get started recording, the whole purpose of this podcast is that any educator or educators who are listening to this, or folks who are looking to get into the profession, will be able to glean some gems to be like, oh, okay, that's good to know. I'm not the only one who thinks this way, or that's good to know to, I guess, be able to avoid certain speed bumps or roadblocks. And so hopefully 10 years, 20 years down the line, they'll still be in the profession. So maybe we can start there. How did you get into the field of education?
Yeah, so my journey in education started back when I was about 15 years old. I needed volunteer hours, I think, for the honor society I was in or something like that. And so I decided to volunteer for the summer camps at a local organization in my city. And I just loved it so much that I actually still work for that organization today, like 10 years later, which is crazy. So that's how I got started, at least with the informal side of education, which I really love.
Nice.
And then for classroom education, when I was in high school, I did an internship at an outdoor education school. So, and a few other districts, I believe, have something similar. Basically, sixth graders in the school district would come up into the mountains for a week and we would teach them their science curriculum outdoors. And it was really fun. Yeah. And that's kind of, I think, where I started to actually develop a love for teaching itself and not just working with kids, but also teaching kids.
Yep.
And I just learned so much up at that internship. But then when I went to college, I actually went to college for technical theater because I'm also a big theater nerd. And while I was doing that, I kind of just realized it wasn't something that I wanted to do forever because I wanted to get into stage management. And I was just watching the same show again and again every night. And I was like, this is too repetitive. I don't think I can do this. So, but then I remembered like, hey, I really like teaching. And so I decided to switch my major to education. And that's kind of how I ended up in classroom teaching.
Awesome. Now, what grade of kiddos or students do you teach?
When I was teaching full time, I taught third, fourth, and fifth graders.
Okay, so elementary.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet.
Yeah.
And while you were teaching, is there something that you know now that you wish, hey, if I could go back to the future, give myself a note and say, hey, everything's not a priority, but this one thing is, what would be that one thing that you would tell your younger self?
I think what I would tell my younger self is that not everything is going to go perfectly. In fact, most things aren't going to go perfectly when it comes to teaching.
Yep.
And that's okay. And to just roll with it and learn from your mistakes and try again next time. And I think also just telling myself that, at least in my experience, students are very forgiving when it comes to you making a mistake while you're teaching. And so just kind of leaning into that and, they're not going to judge you for the mistakes that you make typically, at least not elementary. I haven't really worked with higher than sixth grade, but I think that's what I would tell myself is to lean into the mistakes and don't be afraid to make them because they are going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a great gem to pass on. Unlike a play where like the lines are already pre-written and like if you are a person who's been to this play, you're like, all right, I know it. Act 2, scene 3, line whoever is going to be X, Y, Z. Yeah, with teaching, you could teach the same subject, or same material, and each time you can come up with a new line, and that it is okay. You are correct that for most grades, I've taught predominantly middle school. They are forgiving. If you come in authentically and genuinely yourself, the students will be very lenient with how you say things, when you say things, and even if you make a mistake, like I made a mistake here, and acknowledge that. Yeah, they're pretty cool about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What subject what subject have you enjoyed teaching the most?
So in the school that I was teaching in, I only taught science and social studies. We had the kids rotate just based on our staffing needs. We had them rotate for their subjects.
Okay.
So science and social studies are definitely my jam.
Nice.
Science was probably my favorite. And the organization that I started teaching with was a science organization. And but now my full-time job is with a social studies organization. So it's cool that the two subjects I was teaching I get to work with
You got
full-time.
both. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, For many of the guests that are had on the podcast, this question is one that usually they cheer up about and they get a little bit brighter. Was there a teacher for you that was just amazing, that sort of saw you, saw that potential in you, and sort of like poured into you when you were coming up?
Yeah, and I think back to that internship that I did, back in high school. I
Yeah,
had I guess he wasn't, like, technically a teacher, but I saw him as a teacher. His
right.
name was Mr. Harding, and he was basically in charge of all of us high school interns. There were, like, 10 of us, and, he, like, quite literally, um, opened my eyes to, like, how much I loved science. There was one night, it was astronomy night, and I would teach spectroscopy with him, and which is the study of like light and color. And I was just standing outside with him, and we were looking up at the stars. And at that time, I had glasses, but I never wore them. And he asked me, he was like, "Don't you wear glasses?" And I was like, "Yeah, but only when I want to see things that are far away." And he was like, "You should put them on right now." And I was like, "Okay." So I put them on, and the stars were just like amazing. It was, oh, my mind was blown. I was like, "Oh my gosh." And so I just always felt like I could turn to him, especially during that internship. There were times where, since it was like my first time teaching students, I at the end of each week, the kids would get to like write thank you letters to their interns. And for the first like 3 weeks, I wasn't getting any letters, and so I kind of turned to him and was really like disappointed with that. And he helped me see that I was still making an impact, even if I wasn't getting those letters right away. And he ended up
Yeah,
writing me a letter, which was super sweet. And then eventually I did start getting the letters, but he definitely is probably one of my favorite teachers. And I feel like I should reach out to him again before he retires to make sure
awesome.
that he knows that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What do you find, because you talked about the study of the light and colors. Um, how do you pronounce it again?
Spectroscopy.
Spectroscopy. Is there a particular lesson that you love the most that you know, like, all right, this one usually is the one that kiddos, students just like go bananas over?
Mhm. That one was pretty cool. We had different gases in like tubes,
Yeah,
and essentially the kids had these special glasses that they would put on. And when we turned off the lights and they looked at the light in the tube, it would be different shiny colors, because that's
nice.
how scientists determine different gases that are on other planets.
Yeah,
So that was always really fun. I can still um, imagine how excited they were. Another lesson I always loved teaching was planet sizes. I'm a big
mm,
space person, and so there was this video I would play for my students, and it would show like just how small the Earth is, and it would get like, as each item in space got bigger and bigger, it would like blow their minds, and that was one
yeah.
of my favorite things to show them.
I do think the relative size of things is something that a lot of kids, when they actually like, oh my, um, Earth is huge, but when you're
Mhm.
comparing it to other planets and other celestial bodies, it's just like, not really.
Yeah.
And that sort of like is mind-boggling. And I
Right.
the also too, when students have to realize um how in space things are measured in light years and what that means, and yeah, the light that you're seeing with stars, what that actually means is another one where it's just like, whoa, okay,
Mhm.
which is pretty cool. And I think it's pretty cool that you're doing that in elementary, or we're doing that in elementary, where at such a young age you're planting that seed of science for kids to like, oh, I want to know more about this and delve deeper into it as they move on in the years, which is pretty cool. Nice,
Yeah, it
nice.
was really fun getting to be like an elementary science teacher, because most students don't get that when they're
Yeah,
in, a self-contained classroom. The focus is very much on literacy and math, and teachers aren't given the resources to teach science and social studies. So it was nice that I was able to give that experience to
yeah.
such young students.
Leads me to the next question of, if you were
Mhm.
to create the ideal school where funds are not an issue, what would encompass sort of a Mrs. Garcia school of XYZ?
I like that question. Let's see. I think I liked having the kids rotate for their subjects. I think it benefits them more than just being in one classroom. I think
Agreed.
Yeah, it's nice because they get to move around and they get to have a bunch of different teachers. So, maybe they're not vibing with one teacher one day, at least they can go to another one in like an hour.
Yep.
Um, and I think it's nice for them to have all their classes and subjects separate. So that way, when they get into one room, it's like, this is the math room, it's time for math, and this is the literacy room, it's time to read. So I think that is definitely one aspect that would be in my dream school is they would all switch for their subjects. Another thing that I really liked while I was teaching was we had a makerspace in our school. So I would take the kids there every week and it would be mostly STEM related activities. So we
Hmm.
had things like robots and there was a 3D printer in there and a Lego wall and all sorts of fun STEM opportunities. So I think I would definitely put that in any school, um, with adding art into the mix. That's another thing is making sure kids have all their specials and honestly every day if they're able to. When I was teaching, my kids only had art once every 2 weeks, which
Wow.
I just thought, yeah, and kids love art. So that made me really sad that that was the elective or the special that ended up getting cut basically.
All right.
And I like PE and music and art are just as important as any other subject, especially for young kids. So, um, dream world school, those would be like front and center, like any other subject.
It's interesting because it's only recently that I started learning about the makerspace. So I'm not an expert in it, but I would love to be able to see it in action. I've only seen it in brochures or short video clips. Was that something that how many years did your school have sort of the makerspace? Was
I
it
think it
something
was
relatively new?
fairly recent. I worked there for 3 years, and I think they had only gotten it like a year or two before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. To anyone who's listening, I would highly recommend looking into and researching makerspaces. The one that I saw was similar to what you mentioned. It was very STEM based, coupled with some activities to do with Legos. But I'm not an expert still. Like I said, it was only just recently that I was introduced to it. And I was just like, this is such a really cool idea. And like you mentioned, students just love young kids, just I think all kids love art and to be able to make something. And like you mentioned, to have that 3D printer present, or even just the Lego bricks, where kids can make things and just like see whatever is in their imagination come to life, it's pretty amazing.
Hmm.
If I were to ask you, when it comes to like the trajectory, also of like, all right, after a certain number of years, you made the switch from one school to another, and now the position that you're at is more like social studies based. Um, how has that transition been for you? Because I know there are a lot of teachers like once they're, hey, I'm a math teacher, I'm staying with math. I'm not looking to transition to anything else. How's that been for you?
Yeah, so it's definitely a transition. My new job is within social studies, but it's outside of a classroom.
Okay.
And I think that's a transition that not a lot of teachers who've moved from like a teaching position to a non-teaching position talk about enough.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like a lot of teachers, they leave because they're frustrated or they're upset or it just wasn't for them. And at least this is what I see on TikTok. And then, they'll get a new job outside of teaching and talk about how wonderful it is. And my new job is wonderful, but there are transitions that I feel like need to be addressed as well,
Yeah.
such as, I think the biggest challenge for me is just finding my new identity, just because teaching was and still is. There are parts of my job where I do get the opportunity to still teach, so that's really nice and I enjoy it a lot. But to kind of think, that part of my identity of being a teacher and inserting my teaching stories into conversations and things like that, um, that's not, when I talk about my students, it's weird not being able to like say, oh yeah, my kids, like my students, it feels like I was just teaching them yesterday. But it wasn't. I feel like that's the biggest transition is transitioning from I'm a teacher to like I was a teacher. There's definitely it's definitely something I'm still trying to navigate.
I think thank you, number one, because I do think that is something that a lot of educators have difficulty with in what you mentioned too, whether it be IG, whether it be Facebook, whether it be TikTok, or whatever piece of social media that we take in where we are considering or thinking or see teachers who made that transition. It's always like very much, I was in the classroom, it was what it was, and now that I'm not, it's either like it's just fantastic. And to know that there's always that nuanced space of the gray area, and also too of, okay, when you decided to make that transition, it's never just the light switch where you just get it immediately. There's going to be some sense of, like you mentioned, for us who are educators, that is a huge part of our identity. And so to know that, hey, we're taking this jacket off, putting on another one, it's going to feel a little different, and that's okay. And I don't think
Hmm.
there are enough people who just verbalize that, articulate that, say that out loud, say the quiet thing out loud,
Hmm.
so that whoever else is considering that or going through that is also going to feel like, okay, it's not only me who is feeling this. The caterpillar becoming the butterfly has to go through the metamorphosis of, yeah, there's a bit of a cocoon and then emerge as something else. And so, thank you for that honesty and saying that part out loud. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
If you, Before I were to ask, um, is there anything that you've read or are reading that has been like really helpful, in terms of, hey, I would highly recommend this? And it can either be, hey, this is just for my personal, hey, outside of the classroom, or it could
Mhm.
have been something connected to the classroom. But is there a book or something that you've read or are reading at the moment that you would recommend?
Yeah, and I think it could be applied to anyone's life, really. For me, it
Awesome.
has to do outside of the classroom. I'm reading the Atomic Habits book, which
Oh,
has been around for a while,
yes.
but
Good
I'm
one.
finally reading it just because I have such a bad phone addiction that I'm trying to break. I feel like I've had it for years. I just want to break it. And this book has really helped me a lot with that, just because it is a bad habit. And
Yeah,
to read a book about habits has really opened my eyes to just how they form and how they are breakable. And so I think literally everyone can benefit from that book because everybody either has a bad habit they're trying to break or they have a good habit that they want to start. And that book covers both of those things.
absolutely. Without being specific as to where exactly you are in the book, would you say you're in the first half or the second half of the book?
The second half.
Second half. Excellent.
Hmm.
Um, to anyone who's listened to this podcast, that has been a book that I have highly recommended, have read twice before, and every single time that I read it, I'm like, oh, here's something else that I can apply to my life right now. So, high, it is a great piece of literature, and like you mentioned, can be used in the personal life as well as the professional life. So,
Hmm.
dope book. If I could ask you, this is the question that I am always happiest to ask because I'm a music lover. I just love to know, like, hey, what do folks taste and be able to discover new pieces of music? If you were to create the Mrs. Garcia, and knowing that, hey, this playlist 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, 2 days from now could change, and that's okay. But what would be Mrs. Garcia's top five playlist at the moment? Either top five artists, top five songs. What would compose that playlist?
Well, like I said, I'm a total theater nerd.
Yes, and
So,
that's
and
okay.
yeah, I love listening to musicals, especially when I'm on like long drives. That's when it's
Yes.
time for my personal performance in the car.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so I thought of my top five musicals. My number one favorite musical is Cabaret. I
Okay.
love that musical so much. I don't know if you've heard of that one before. It's kind
My
of an
wife
older.
has, yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Yep.
yeah, I love that musical. I think this one people might see as cliche, but I love Hamilton. I think it is just an
It's a good
amazing,
one.
yeah, it's
Wait for it.
incredible. Yeah, I love it so much.
Yes.
This one seems kind of silly, but I love it. It's Legally Blonde, the musical. I like it better than the movie, to be honest. And some people feel differently about that, but
That's
I
okay.
love that musical.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
it's a great show.
Yep.
There's this other musical. It's not a Broadway musical. It's this random Star Kid musical. It's on YouTube and it's called Twisted. And it's the story of Aladdin, but it's from Jafar's point of view.
Ooh,
It's good. It's really funny. It's definitely an adult musical, but I like it a lot. And then
I
I couldn't
I
come up,
love that.
yeah. Yeah, and then I couldn't come up with a fifth one, and I wanted to leave that open because I feel like that fifth space kind of just changes depending on my mood.
Yeah, I was gonna speak to the Twisted, um,
Hmm.
just because Wicked is in the air. When stories are told from the vantage point of, I don't want to say villain, but the other characters, like to be able to, whoever the writer is, like to get in that mind space is something that I love because as a person who also enjoys history, even though I teach math, I'm like Hamilton as an example for Lin-Manuel. Like, hey, I want to tell the story from this person's perspective, but also then knowing that you have these other perspectives and that's going to change, not knowing what was happening in his or her life and how that affects what they're going through, I think is just dope. So I've never heard of Twisted, but I'm happy that you mentioned it. And I also even like the fifth spot being an open spot of like, hey, just drop in, depending on what the mood is. That another musical could fit right in there, and it would make the top five. Is a dope twist that I haven't had a guest uh do just yet. You're the first to be like, you know what,
Oh, nice.
that fifth spot is going to be an open spot. We'll keep it rotating.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. I also I appreciated that you mentioned that as educators, education does take a ginormous part of our identity, but it's not the only part of our identity. So, like you mentioning, like, hey, I can also weave in that I love musicals in my lessons. I can also weave in that, hey, in the past that I used to teach science into my lessons. Or if there is, hey, I'm into Marvel or I'm into DC or I'm into, hey, these other things that to show the students like it's okay to like multiple things and that's what it is to be a human being. It's not just one thing, it's many things. And I also think as educators, it's just always nice to hear other educators who have that balance. So another point for to say thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. I definitely used Hamilton when it came to teaching my fifth graders about the American Revolution. I would have to find the clean clips, but
Yes.
they were used.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. To anyone who's listening, I feel like there were a couple of gems that were dropped here. I truly appreciate the point that you made of like, hey, there is a bit of transitioning, and that's okay to like feel like, all right, I have this new jacket that I'm wearing, and it's gonna take a little time to break in and feel like it's mine, but that's okay. And to say that out loud, if you are a person who's transitioning to a new grade level, a new subject, or even transitioning from education to something else, I think is always nice to hear. And thank you for that, folks. This has been another episode of the Chronicles of Mr. I'm Mr. Pierre. She's Mrs. Garcia. Thank you so much for listening, watching. Appreciate it. And we're out.